The Normandy landings were the landing operations and associated airborne operations on the 6th of June, 1944. Codenamed Operation Neptune and often referred to as D-Day, it is the largest seaborne invasion in history. The operation began the liberation of France and the rest of Western Europe, and laid the foundations of the Allied victory on the Western Front. The amphibious landings were preceded by extensive aerial and naval bombardment and an airborne assault, the landing of 24,000 American, British, and Canadian airborne troops shortly after midnight. Allied infantry and armored divisions began landing on the coast of France at 6:30. The target 50-mile stretch of the Normandy coast was divided into 5 sectors: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. The best German infantry units based in France in 1944 were the regiments of the Fallschirmjäger divisions or parachute divisions. Although they were actually Luftwaffe troops, these units were by this time in the war tactically subordinated to Army command. The 2nd and 3rd divisions constituted the 2. Fallschirmkorps, 2. Parachute Corps, commanded by General Eugen Meindl. The 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment of the 3. Fallschirmjäger Division was well equipped and had excellent personnel. This regiment could be considered the most competent infantry unit of the German forces in France, and the German paratroopers of the regiment fought with distinction throughout the campaign. The regiment was organized along the same lines as a standard German Army infantry regiment, having 3 battalions, each of which was made up of 3 rifle companies and a heavy company. The 13th Company was a heavy mortar company, the 14th an anti-tank company, and the 15th an engineer company. The 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment at this time had 3,457 officers and men. This was considerably larger than an equivalent Army unit, and the rifle companies of the regiment had twice as many light machine guns as a standard infantry division's companies. The men were also of a higher quality compared with many of the other more standard units at this time. At least a third of the officers and a good portion of the non-commissioned officers were veterans, having fought in Crete, North Africa, and Russia. The remainder of the men were all volunteers, with the average age across the regiment being 17.5 years. Morale was excellent and the whole regiment was jump-trained, each man having made 6 daytime and 3 nighttime jumps. The commander of the regiment was Major Friedrich August Freiherr von der Heydt, one of the most experienced airborne commanders of the entire German Air Force. The main weakness of the 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment was the same as all of the regiments and divisions of the German Army. They simply lacked any real transport capability. Each company in the regiment had an average of 2 trucks, and the 70 trucks across the whole unit were of 50 different makes: German, French, Italian, and even British. In May 1944 the regiment was deployed to Normandy and spread out amongst the towns at the base of the Cotentin Peninsula. They formed the strategic reserve for the Corps. From the first moments of the airborne invasion of France, 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment was in action against American paratroopers from the U.S. 101st Airborne Division. Scattered firefights continued throughout the night, until early morning on June 6 the regiment was given orders to assemble and clear the region between Carentan and Saint-Mère-Église of enemy troops. It was no easy task to withdraw troops currently spread out, in action and with limited transport, and get them to the assembly point, so it took until early afternoon for the initial movement and reorganization to be completed. The troops then moved through Carentan, which Major von der Heydt had already determined was not occupied by American troops. 3rd Battalion initially remained behind in the town with the 13th Company, protecting the regiment's rear areas, while the regimental command post was set up at Saint-Come-du-Montana 1. Battalion moved out towards Sainte-Marie-du-Mont, while 2 Battalion advanced on Saint-Mère-Église. At first the advances made good time, but by midnight both battalions were in heavy contact just short of their objectives. 1 Battalion found the U.S. paratroopers at Sainte-Marie-du-Mont had linked up with the 4th Infantry Division moving inland from Utah Beach. Earlier in the evening and again before dawn on June 7 waves of American gliders and paratroopers began to drop across the entire combat area, and the 2 battalions found themselves low on ammunition and increasingly cut off from the regimental rear areas. 2 Battalion successfully withdrew and attempted to link up with the now surrounded 1 Battalion but was unable to move more than a few hundred yards east of Saint-Come-du, Montana. By now 1. Battalion was trying to extricate itself to the south. While crossing through open fields and marshes north of the Douve River, it came under fire from small groups of the U.S. 501st and 506th Parachute Infantry Regiments. The American troops were able to bluff the 1. Battalion into believing they were facing overwhelming U.S. strength, and the majority of the battalion surrendered, with only 25 men escaping to Carentan. Other elements of the 506th, supported by 6 Sherman tanks of the 746th Tank Battalion and the guns of the 65th Armored Field Artillery Battalion, advanced on Saint-Come-du-Mont, which von der Heydt had now protected with 2 battalions of his own troops. While the U.S. paratroopers made headway, they could not dig the Jaeger out from their defenses amongst the solid Norman hedgerows. The attack was called off so a much larger assault could be launched the following day. On June 8 the glider infantry and 501st attempted to encircle the town and cut off the Germans' retreat, while the units of the 506th advanced directly into Saint-Come-du, Montana. An intense artillery barrage smashed into the defenders. Grenadiers started to show signs of cracking. Von der Heydt decided that with no more reserves to commit, it was time to withdraw. His men were forced to fight their way past the 501st, but the majority of the German forces were able to escape to the west and retreat back into Carentan. The Americans immediately began to prepare an assault on Carentan, readying 4 regiments, 501st, 502nd and 506th and 327th Glider Infantry, for the attack. A 2-pronged attack down the main causeway in Carentan and across the river flats to the east of the city was put into action. The causeway was a 6 to 9 feet high embankment above the marshland with 4 bridges that crossed the Douve and its associated canals. The German defenders had destroyed one of the bridges. In the mid-afternoon of June 10, men from the 3rd Battalion, 502nd advanced in single file down the causeway. They soon came under heavy machine gun fire from the Fallschirmjäger in a farmhouse and bocage, which took a heavy toll on the U.S. paratroopers. The 4th bridge was also blocked by a Belgian gate, which meant just one man could squeeze through at a time. The Americans were held at this point until past midnight, when they were able to filter men past the barricade. On the morning of June 11, an intense artillery barrage was arranged to force the Jaeger out of the farmhouse. This failed, and it wasn't until the U.S. battalion commander personally led a dramatic charge against the position that the German paratroopers' rifle pits and machine gun posts in front of the building and along the hedgerows were knocked out. 3 American battalions had been used in the action thus far, and this attack had finally exhausted 502nd, meaning the 506th would have to take over the advance. 327th Glider Infantry had also slowly made headway, and by the morning of June 11 they were just a few hundred yards from the eastern outskirts of Carentan, where they were finally stopped by German fire. By now von der Heydt's men were running seriously short of ammunition. Supplies had not been able to come forward due to the shortage of motor transport and the Allied Air Force's interdiction of the Normandy road network. This had also held up any reinforcements that were trying to reach Carentan. The only resupply came during the night of June 12 when ammunition was air-dropped to the Fallschirmjäger southwest of the city. On the evening of June 11, 501st and 506th were committed to the battle, and throughout the night the U.S. paratroopers watched as Carentan was subjected to near continual naval gunfire, artillery, mortar and tank destroyer bombardment. On June 12, 506th attacked Hill 30 to south of the city, and from there they assaulted the city. From the northeast, 327th Glider Infantry also drove into Carentan, with the 2 units meeting up. 501st PIR circled the city, linking up with 506th, closing the trap around German defenders. Remarkably, the German defenders seemed to offer little resistance. Unbeknownst to the Americans, von der Heydt had recognized the danger and before dark on June 11 had withdrawn from Carentan and set up a new defensive line to the southwest of the city. This line held against the attacks by 501st and 506th that resumed on the afternoon of June 12. On June 12 the reinforcements that were meant to assist 6th Fallschrimjäger Regiment in holding Carentan finally arrived, the 17th Gotz von Berlichingen, SS Panzergrenadier Division. Annoyed that Fallschirmjäger had given up the city, Brigadeführer Werner Ostendorf, the SS commander, at first sought von der Heyd's arrest for defeatism, but was eventually calmed down by his superiors. The German paratroopers were now subordinated to the SS division, and on June 13, together they launched a counterattack to regain Carentan. The attack, supported by assault guns from 17 SS Panzerabteilung, hit both 501st and 506th and drove them back towards the city. 2. Battalion, 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment managed to get into Carentan and took up positions near the railway station. However, they were forced to retreat when 502nd and a combat group made up of a battalion of tanks and a battalion of armored infantry from 2nd Armored Division and supported by the 14th Armored Field Artillery Battalion were committed to the battle. By the early afternoon, the initiative had swung back to the Americans and the attack was repulsed. This was the last time German forces attempted to retake Carentan. The next few weeks saw less activity in this sector of the battlefield as the American units there passed over to the defensive while the main U.S. operations shifted to the taking of Cherbourg. The Americans around Carentan sought to consolidate their gains and bring in reinforcements. The 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment remained active, patrolling and probing the U.S. defenses, whilst constantly preparing their own defenses with bunkers, mines, and barbed wire. Mid-July found 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment entrenched around the village of Saint-Germain-sur-Seveys on a small island bordered by the Seveys River, marshland, and creeks. All of this area was heavy bocage country. Opposing them was the U.S. 90th Infantry Division, a unit that had fought hard and suffered heavy casualties thus far in the campaign and who was now largely made up of green replacements. The 90th had been tasked with taking Saint-Germain-sur-Seveys as a prelude to the main attack on Saint-Lô. On July 22, after a heavy artillery barrage, 358th Regiment of 90th Infantry Division breached the forward lines of 3 Battalion, 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment, penetrating more than 800 yards inside German lines. But here there was little cover for the advancing American troops and they came under a steady crossfire. Around midday, von der Heydt ordered his 16th Company, commanded by Sergeant Alexander Uhlig, to counterattack the Americans, re-establish the German main line of defense, and if possible capture a couple of prisoners. Major von der Heydt had incorrectly assumed that the American attack was a small reconnaissance in force and that Uhlig's company of 32 men would be enough to successfully complete the mission. However, after a brief survey of the battlefield, Uhlig realized his unit would be facing at least 300 U.S. soldiers. Seemingly unconcerned by this disparity, at 1800 he launched his attack into the right flank of the 358th 1st Battalion, and over the next 3 hours his men drove the Americans back 350 yards. 4 Jaeger were lost in the attack, but as Uhlig had been unable to take any prisoners, he decided to continue. As he listened to the U.S. infantry digging in overnight, Uhlig decided that he would need to launch his next attack from the other flank to achieve surprise. He then went looking for reinforcements and was promised 2 milligrams 42 heavy machine guns and 16 men from 3 Battalion. He also found a tank commander from the 2 Das Reich SS Panzerdivision who arranged for 3 panzers to support the attack the next morning. Uhlig positioned the MG-42s to stop any reinforcements from reaching the Americans' forward positions, and also to block the unit he would be attacking from retreating back to the U.S. main lines. The machine gunners were ordered not to fire in support of the initial assault, keeping their presence as a surprise. The first assault began on July 23, and it took 2 more attacks to break the Americans. Down to just 1 panzer by this time, the third assault broke through to the 1st Battalion's command post, and the men of that unit began to fall back in panic or surrender. Many of those that retreated were cut down by the 2 emplaced MG-42s who now opened fire. Uhlig's company of 50 men and 1 panzer had captured over 200 American soldiers through the effective use of his limited resources, terrain, close armor support, well-positioned machine guns, and their cumulative effect on a Green Battalion. Immediately after the battle, the Jaeger witnessed several U.S. Army chaplains trying to help the wounded men in no man's land. Impressed by their bravery, an impromptu ceasefire began, later formalized by von der Heydt into a 3-hour truce which also allowed an exchange of wounded prisoners. On October 24, 1944, Alexander Ulig was awarded the Knight's Cross for his actions near Saint-Germain-sur-Seveys in July. He would later be captured by members of the 90th Infantry Division and survive the war. 6th Fallschrimjäger Regiment was still operating with 2. Das Reich SS Panzerdivision when American forces launched Operation Cobra. The regiment, together with the SS troops, were forced to break out of the Rancy pocket in the final days of July 1944. On July 31, what remained of 6th Fallschrimjäger Regiment was attached to 353 Infantry Division. Formed into a small Kampfgruppe, the Jaeger made up the infantry division's reserve and were moved to wherever the action was thickest or a penetration in the German main line of resistance most likely. On August 10, the 6th Fallschrimjäger Regiment was ordered to disengage and move to Nancy in northeastern France for refitting. The 6th Fallschrimjäger Regiment suffered approximately 3,000 casualties during the Normandy campaign. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and to make sure you don't miss my future work, please make sure you are subscribed to my channel and press the bell notification button. Thank you and see you in the next video.